This is a PCI card that allows me to hook up older IDE drives to my new computer. I think it's pretty awesome since I'm always transferring files between my new and my old computers, and so I don't have to have a middleman computer or anything, just hook up the hard drive. This is for PCI, like standard PCI. People have been going on about how PCI should die and it should be replaced by PCI Express 1X slots, but I've not used one PCI 1X slot, and I'm using two PCI cards. So I think PCI is way more useful than PCI 1X, but of course 16X is for video cards and stuff like that, so that's obviously gotta stay. I don't care, PCI should stay. So obviously I'm gonna throw this back into my computer real quick. Well, I do 4 times the speed video super fast, yes. And then I'm gonna plug in the first victim, which is a Maxtor hard drive. I think it's either 7 or 14 gigabytes. Not sure. But I have this little Molex here I can pull out from the side of my computer. It might like make my cable management not look as good, but I don't care. Usability over aesthetics for sure. But this specific drive is not formatted. I stopped the format when it was formatting once. It does work, but right now it's just not formatted, so I'm just going to skip on to the next one, which is this other Maxtor right here. This drive right here has stuff on it, so I'm just going to format it real quick and then throw something on it just to show. So the format is now complete, and to just demonstrate this card's data transferring capabilities, I'm going to throw on my emulators from my bigger hard drive onto this, and we'll see with this little close-up here of how fast this actually goes. About 40 megs or 30 megs, somewhere around there, per second. So now it's time for this thing's real test. The Western Digital Caviar 21200 is still on the sled for the 486. And this is the drive that I'll be probably transferring most often to for older games and stuff, just so I don't have to get the floppy disks out and all that. So let's see how well this controller handles this drive. Okay, the first thing we're going to want to note is that this drive takes a lot longer than other drives to spin up. So we notice right here, it does not detect the drive. And so when the drive spins up and initializes, it sends the signal to Windows right when it's booting up. So guess what it does? It's like Windows is like, oh, someone hot swapped an IDE drive, let's just freeze. So what I do is, pick up my camera like a retard here in a moment after I, show you how much it froze, and reset the computer. But the drive is still spun up and initialized when you hit the soft reset. So watch it show up here. It'll say Western Digital Caviar 1.2 gig right there. There we go. And then it should boot into Windows like normal, like my 23-second boot time after you tell it to boot normally. Speedy on my SSD, look at this. Just boom, the logo hasn't even done yet. Another showing off with the SSD, I think it's super speedy. So the computer reads the drive and you can transfer files. Look at all this DOS junk. Isn't it just beautiful? So this Chasm game is obviously not a DOS game, but I'm just going to move it here just to prove a point. All I gotta do is move stuff onto my 486, so if I want to install a driver or a game, all I gotta do is get the hard drive out of the machine, put it on this, and then move it. And I don't have to deal with any of the other secondary computers and floppy disks and flash drives and all that baloney, just gotta move it directly over. And it can delete stuff too. Voila. So that is the IDE controller for the PCI. Works pretty good, and I would recommend getting one for transferring old files.
ISA bus, or the first standardized system bus, and over the years it served as standard in the PC sphere. Some slots of the bus can still be found on certain system boards. ISA bus appeared in 1981 as an 8-bit bus used in XT generation computers. The 8-bit bus has 62 contacts located in the slot. These include 8 data lines, 20 addressing lines, 6 interrupt request lines. The bus functions on the 4.77 MHz frequency. The 8-bit ISA bus is the most low speed of all system buses. Its bandwidth capacity is only 1.2 megabit per second. That is why this version of the bus is no longer used. Then ISA developed into the 16-bit bus, sometimes called AT bus. First appeared in 1984. Its slots consist of two parts, one of which, crater, is a complete copy of the 8-bit slot. The additional part comprises 36 contacts, additional 8 data lines, 4 addressing lines, and 5 interrupt request lines, plus a contact for the new SBHE signal. All 8-bit buses can be set in the new bus slots, but the contrary way is impossible. Byte transfer through the ISA bus is realized as follows. First, the address of the memory location of the I/O port to which the data is to be transferred is set up on the bus, and then the data itself is set up on the data line. Wait state difference is realized and a data transfer signal, a record strobe, is given, but no information is provided as to whether the information has been recorded or not. But on the 8.33 MHz bus clock frequency, even the most slow-speed devices can ensure data command exchange through the bus. The bandwidth capacity in such a case is 5.3 megabit per second. The need to increase efficiency together with ensuring compatibility led to the further ISA bus development.
In September 1988, several companies, Compaq, Epson, Hewlett-Packard, NEC, and Olivetti, among them, presented a 32-bit bus extension with full backward compatibility named AISA. AISA slot is fully compatible with the ISA slot. As in the case of the 16-bit extension, new possibilities were ensured by way of new lines addition. Being impossible to further enlarge the ISA slot, the designers made a trick. They placed new contacts between the ISA bus contacts and did not bring them to the slot edge. AISA is a 32-bit bus which, in combination with the 8.33 MHz frequency, provides 32 megabits per second bandwidth capacity and addresses memory of up to 4 GB. The ISA bus is very widely used. It's the ancestor of unified PC buses, but it has gone out of date rather long ago and finds very little application nowadays, as it doesn't meet contemporary requirements.
What's going on, everyone? This is going to be another unboxing video, but since this is something small and something that won't appeal to everybody, it's a PCI card, I figured I would combine this unboxing video with an installation video. So if you guys like when I work inside my computer, if you like seeing the components I have and everything, then this is going to be a video that, it's just going to be sort of a lean back sort of video, just me unboxing something and then me installing it and then booting back up and see how it works. So the first part of this is going to be an unboxing, and this is a SATA controller. If you guys have been watching my YouTube channel in the past month or so, you'll know that I have a solid state drive. And my motherboard, the Gigabyte X58A UD3R, the SATA controllers aren't the best thing in the world, and so because of that, I don't get the full speed of the drive, even though it's hooked up to SATA 3. So that's what this is going to do. I hooked the hard drive up to this, and then this is a PCI card, and from there, the controller in this PCI card should let me get the full speed of my drive. Right now I'm getting about 200 megabytes per second less of a read, and about 100 seconds less of the write. So this should boost things pretty well, and I've heard very good things online about it. So let's just go ahead and proceed with the unboxing. So we have a little tab there, and here we go. And of course, they have a driver CD, which I won't even be needing because I'm just using it with OS X. This card isn't supposed to work with OS X, but it just does. It just works. But there's like a little schematic, I suppose. And, a bunch of really interesting stuff, so I can show you how to install it. Please prepare a floppy disk. That is so current. Anyway, let's go ahead and just take the tape off this. And here's the actual card itself. And even though this does have, the short, I'm not exactly sure PCI what, but I will be putting this into a regular PCI Express slot, so the card will not take up the whole slot. However, I only put it in there because my PCI Express slots will get the full speed, whereas this slot of my motherboard will not. So as you can see, that's where you plug in your SATA. This has 2 connections on it. There are some that have some on the outside, but frankly, I don't know why. Like, if you have like a SATA external hard drive, that's the only reason I could see putting, like, I wouldn't want wires coming out of my case. But yeah, that's pretty much just the card, and this is why I'm doing an installation video as well, because this will be a very short video. So with that said, let's go ahead and install this thing. Alright, so here's the side of my case. So I'm just going to take these screws off. I have 2 thumb screws on the side. I'm sure you guys have seen this in the past, but it's just a relaxed video. Just, if I'm going to go inside my computer, I might as well record it, right? So the screws are off, and the side door is coming off. And if you guys remember, I have a wire here connecting my fan, which needs to come out, which is a very simple process. As you see, we are now good to go. And now I will focus on the area of interest. Alrighty, before I get started, I just want to show you guys what I'm talking about with those other slots. So as you can see, those little white ones there, those are the regular PCI that this card is supposed to go into. However, if I plug it into those, I really won't get any speed boost at all, because those are faster than a solid state drive, or sorry, those are slower than a solid state drive. However, if I plug the card into one of my bigger PCI Express 2.0 slots, then I will get the full speed of my drive. So while this card looks like it's way too small for this slot, and it is, it will still work. So I'm just going to go and back out now, and hopefully this isn't too boring for you guys. Alright, so here's the card, and the first thing I'm going to do is take off the little things over here. Alright, the first thing I'm going to need to do is to take off these little screws here so that, the other side of the card has somewhere to go. So I'm going to go and do that now. And this has never been taken out before, so it's probably going to be tight-ish, so I had to have a screwdriver. Sorry for the arm cam. And here we go. Alright, that can come out. As you can see, it just kind of fell there. And here you go. So now that's a little open space. So here's the card. And I'm just going to go, and it's going to go right in this little blue slot right here. I'm going to try my best not to block it, but I really can't make any promises. It's going to be sort of an awkward angle, but I'll try my best. Alright, so it's lined up. And it is now installed correctly, so I'm going to put this screw right back in there. Once again, sorry for the arm cam. Alright, the PCI card is now in. Okay, so now I actually have to plug in the solid state drive to my controller card. And so here's the SATA port, the SATA cable really for my solid state, plugged into the SATA 3 port. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug that. Alright, as you can see, it's now out. Now I'm simply going to pull it through, and it should be able to just thread right on through. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little for you guys. Okay, and now that can simply go in over here. Okay, so here's the cable, and I'm just going to simply plug it in. So hopefully I'm not blocking you guys. There we go, and now the card is plugged in. So the disadvantages of this is pretty obvious. I now have a cable stretching across there, but if I get the speeds advertised on this drive, one cable here will be worth it. Okay, upon further investigation of this SATA card, you actually have to go into multi-beast first before your solid-state drive will boot with it. So that's a big thing. If you ever decide to get a SATA card, especially this one, the ASM 1061 controller chip, if you decide to get that, then you will have to go into multi-beast and install a Kext before you'll be able to even boot into your hard drive. What I recommend doing is having a backup Lion partition or a Snow Leopard partition, just something that you can run multi-beast with on a hard drive that this won't affect. And with just the regular hard drive plugged into the regular SATA ports on your motherboard, boot into that, and from there install that Kext in multi-beast to your solid state, and then reboot with your solid state, and it should work just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and boot up my system for you guys. So as you can see, it's now on. And we have monitors. As you can see, using PCI connection 2, or Gen 2 rather. SATA port is, as you can see, it's the OCZ drive, so that's very nice. So it just lets you know it's working right off the bat. And of course, now we're just booting into Macintosh SSD. You guys can see what I did there. And it's counting down. And here we are booting OS 10. Alrighty, so there's my login screen. I'm going to grab my Apple keyboard and type in my password. And as you can see, stuff opens up very fast. So actually what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up Blackmagic disk speed test. Grab my Magic trackpad real quick without clicking it. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and zoom into this for you guys, and you guys can see how fast this is. So you can see write speeds, we're getting about 380. Read speeds about 360. Oh, that time it broke 400. So as you can see, I'm right around the 400 range for both read and write, which is very, very fast. This card definitely boosted my write speeds. Before, my write speed was about like 280 or something, so it boosted it about 100 megabits per second, and that's simply just because the Marvel controllers on my motherboard just aren't as fast. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, just a brief installation and unboxing. So if you have any questions about this card or where you can get it, I'm at CPU Kid. If you have any questions about installing text or multi-beast or anything like that to get it working, it's not too hard of a process, but I can help you with that. So before this video gets any longer, thanks for watching.
I get a lot of questions about PCI Express. What works with what? What doesn't work with what? What are the different generations? What does it all mean? So today we're going to tell you everything you need to know about PCI Express 3.0 as fast as possible. So let's start with the very basics. PCI Express is the interface that is used to plug modern expansion cards into modern computers or motherboards. It completely replaced PCI and AGP, which is great because AGP was only for graphics cards and PCI had to be used for pretty much everything else. PCI Express works with pretty much anything. Sound cards, network cards, RAID cards, video cards, they'll all pretty much fit as long as you're aware of a few simple guidelines. Now I said they're universal, but PCI Express slots are available in a variety of different physical configurations. The most common ones are 1x, 4x, 8x, and 16x. All of these types have different slots on the cards themselves and different slots on the motherboard. The cool part about that is that they're upwards and downwards compatible though. Here I am plugging a PCI Express 1X card into a 16X slot. It gets the same power delivery, it just gets less bandwidth delivered to it because that's all a sound card actually needs. And not only that, but I can take this PCIe 8X RAID card and plug it into a PCIe 4X slot. It'll still work, but it will only have half of the bandwidth available to it that it would have otherwise had if you plugged it into an 8X slot. The other thing that affects the performance of PCI Express is the generation. Here I'm holding a PCI Express Generation 2 16X card, and here I'm holding a PCI Express Generation 3 16X card. They look physically the same on the connectors, but the actual available bandwidth has doubled. In fact, the available bandwidth of PCI Express cards has doubled with each generation. So a PCI Express Generation 1 16X slot is only equivalent in performance to a PCI Express Generation 3 4X slot. So the takeaways from this are pretty straightforward. PCI Express cards work in PCI Express slots as long as there's nothing physically in the way. Performance, on the other hand, is going to be dictated by what generation of PCI Express the card and the slot are running at. So it'll run at whatever is the lowest generation of either the two components. So Gen 2 card, Gen 3 slot, plug them together, they run at Gen 2. And then performance is also determined by the length of the card and the length of the slot. So for example, this quad port gigabit NIC needs at least 500 megabytes per second of bandwidth in order to operate at peak efficiency. That means if I have an older PCIe Gen 1 motherboard, I'll need at least a 4X slot or a hypothetical 2X slot to get the bandwidth I need because it's only 250 megabytes per second in a 1X slot. However, if I have a PCI Express Gen 2 motherboard, I could even use a 1X slot to get everything I need speed, because
Nice.
that'll be about 500
There
megabytes
are many
per
different
second.
types of interfaces that you'll see for SCSI. They've changed quite a bit through the years. Here's an example of one. You can see this one happens to be an Ultra 3 SCSI connection, and you can see a PATA connection right next to it. They're almost the same size. The SCSI might be a little bit shorter. This is a view from above. If we were to look at it from the side, you can see the interface connector is a little bit different than the PATA or the SATA connections that we've used before. This SCSI connection has quite a number of pins associated with it. The cable that we would use to connect this would be something like this, where we would plug into the motherboard, and then might be many different connections on that same cable where we could use all of these different SCSI devices and plug them all in at the same time. If we were to look closer, you can really see a lot of different pins being used. And on this particular SCSI connection, it was a higher bandwidth, so it needed a lot more pins to be able to communicate. But it may not be this type of connection that you would see with SCSI. Because they've changed so much through the years, you might see a DB25 connection that looks like a serial, or maybe even an older parallel connection. They all look very similar, but these are actually SCSI connections. You have to look very carefully to see the differences. Some connections are very clear that they're SCSI. This high density 50 pin connection has locks on the side of it that connect in. That's very, very exclusive to SCSI. And some of these higher density connections as well really make you see that very quickly that's a SCSI connection. There's nothing else that looks quite like those connectors. When you're physically connecting SCSI devices to the SCSI cable that you have, whether they are inside of a computer or outside of a computer, you have to give each one of them a completely unique number. This is called a SCSI ID. So on that single bus, on that single connection coming out of an interface of a computer, we would provide different IDs. For instance, if this was your boot disk, maybe we'll give that SCSI ID 0. If there's a floppy disk or a scanner or an optical device, we might assign that a number 2. If there's a CD-ROM, we might assign that with a SCSI ID of 3. There's also a concept within SCSI connections called a logical unit. So within each physical SCSI ID on that interface, you might have logical units inside of this. This was very common to see if you were plugging in an external SCSI storage device that had multiple hard drives inside of it. You would give the storage device itself a SCSI ID, and then there would be logical units assigned to the individual drives within that single physical device. You also see this quite a bit when you're working with virtualized systems. As I mentioned earlier, the signal that is at the very end of the SCSI bus has to be terminated. There might be a physical terminator, or it might be a termination functionality that's built into the hardware itself. If you ever see what we call SCSI attached devices that are serial attached SCSI, they don't have jumpers, they don't have terminators, they don't have settings. A lot of the more modern storage devices that we are plugging in over something called serial attached SCSI are completely automated in the way that they configure themselves on that SCSI bus. Here's an example of a legacy SCSI device. I think this is an optical device, but it could be a hard drive, it could be a scanner, it could be anything else. Generally, we see two different types of connectors on the back of the device. One of them generally is the connection going in. You can see it written on the back of the device, where we would plug in the in connection from our computer. If we had additional SCSI devices, we would use this out connection to keep the string going, to keep that daisy chain going throughout the connection. If this was the end of the line, if this really was the last device in this SCSI chain, this is where we would plug in the terminator. If this was a device that had the termination built in, there would probably be a connector on this device, or a button you could push to say this was the terminating place. And you can also see the SCSI ID number built right into this as well. There's little buttons that would allow you to change that SCSI ID. So when this device plugged in and communicated across the SCSI bus, everyone know that this device was SCSI ID number 6. Once you have everything plugged in, it looks a little like this, where you have a SCSI controller that might be ID 0. Here's SCSI ID 1. That's a hard disk. Here's another hard disk, and they're all chained together with different SCSI IDs. And at the end of the chain is a terminator. Usually these terminators even have a little light so you can see that they are active. Here's a picture of what a SCSI terminator might look like so you can look at the back of your devices and see if you have one of those. That term daisy chain actually came from this idea of taking daisies and connecting them to each other, and you could wear them as bracelets or wear them on your head, and that same daisy chaining was how we came up with this idea of plugging in all of these devices one to the other to create that chain of devices. The back of the SCSI drive looks very similar to the back of any other hard drive. It's just using a very specialized SCSI connection on the back. Usually you have jumpers that can help you designate what the SCSI ID of this drive happens to be. And here's traditional power that you might find so that that drive can be powered up on the inside of your computer. If this was an external device, then you have external power. You usually have options for setting your SCSI IDs that we saw on the SCSI device earlier and the interfaces for going in and out of that SCSI connection. The connection of the SCSI device on your motherboard looks very similar to PATA in that we've got a connection on the motherboard and multiple interfaces on SCSI. But of course, with PATA, we are limited to 2 individual devices, whereas with SCSI, especially the wide bus SCSI, I can connect up to 16 devices, and you would simply find the closest connector to you and plug it in. It doesn't matter where along this particular cable we plug in our SCSI device. The determination of how this device communicates is associated with the ID that you assign to the SCSI device. So you simply plug into the closest connector to you and plug in all of your different SCSI devices, make sure they have different SCSI IDs, and your SCSI communication is now complete. Once you follow those rules, SCSI is very simple to get running, and it's going to provide you with a lot of flexibility to plug in multiple storage devices.